Ford advised that oil changes are done every 12,500 miles or every 12 months. Frequent oil changes is one of the cheapest ways to maintain the internal health of the engine. Step 1. Warm up the engine.
Now off to the Elan Valley to warm up the engine. We're entering the Elan Valley via the Bailey Bridge. This is situated alongside the original suspension bridge you can see on the left hand side. Next we're heading up to the first dam called the Cabe and Cock. This is the lowest of the 5 dams. On the left hand side again you can see the Carrick-Thue Dam, which is also a submerged dam. Next on the right, a bit hard to see, is the Penargarrick Dam. This dam is open to the public twice a year. And finally in this stretch is the Craiggock Dam. As seen here, you can drive over it, park at the other side and have a lovely walk to the bothy. Finally we're approaching the largest of all the dams, the Clairwyn. This was opened by the Queen in 1952. And as we can see here, my husband, Mr. Happy, smiling away as he does.
Now that the engine is hot and the oil nicely thinned and runny, we can take the car into the garage for the oil change. Although we need the oil hot so that it is thin and runny, it will be dangerously hot, so don't rush too quickly to get the oil out, as it will be over 80 degrees centigrade, which could burn bare skin. Other than a trolley jack and axle stands, you will need the following for the Ford Fiesta: a 21mm socket for the sump, an oil catch pan that can hold 10 litres or more, a torque wrench to torque 25 and 34 Nm, a 27mm socket for the oil filter housing, oil filter element and new rubber sealing ring, 3.8 litres of 5W30 quality synthetic oil, and disposable gloves. So I'm going to use a Ford specification oil, and it's a fully synthetic 5W30. And then I'm going to also use a Wix WL7305A filter cartridge, and here is the cartridge itself, and here is the rubber sealing ring. So we need to make sure we put the new sealing ring on. We'll also need a 27mm socket for the removal of the housing which holds the filter, and for the sump plug we need a 21mm socket. When coming to tighten it all back up, we will need a torque wrench, and it's always wise to use some gloves because dirty oil is not good for your skin. And obviously we also need the catch pan to collect the oil. Since the oil filter is accessed from the top of the engine, we need to open the bonnet first. So from the passenger side of the car, we can pull this lever here and that will release the bonnet catch. So pulling on the lever that just popped out, we can now raise the bonnet, and on the left hand side is the bonnet stay, which pops in there like so. Here are a couple of photos showing the main visible parts on opening the bonnet. So here you can see the oil filler cap and the dipstick, and in this photo you can see the pipe that we need to remove to get to the oil filter. Now to jack the Ford Fiesta up and place on the all important axle stands. So I think you can use a trolley jack on the front subframe, but you may need a low profile jack to get under there. So I'm going to go in my standard way, which is to use 2 jacks on the seals and jack each side up bit by bit until I get to the desired height that I require. So I'm just finding the jacking point there, just behind the front wheel, which is on the seal, and up we go. And then again on the other side, and I keep doing this. Somewhat monotonous. Like I say, you might be able to use the jacking point at the front. Always make safe the car by using axle stands. So I'll highlight the subframe in yellow, which is where you can use a trolley jack. And anyway, so here's the axle stands, which again are going to go onto the subframe. There's one, and here's the second one. So now the car's safe to go under. Now to drain the old oil. Place an oil catch pan under the drain plug and use a 21mm socket to remove. And here's a photo showing the drain plug and the engine oil sump. Removing the oil filler cap first will aid in draining of the old oil. So I'll go ahead first and just remove this, turning anti-clockwise. So now using our 21mm socket, we'll use a breaker bar there and just break the sump plug loose. So I can now then put that onto a ratchet and just spin it most of the way off. Now just before it actually comes off, I'm going to leave it at the last thread and then I'll undo it by hand while pushing upwards. Once the thread's completely undone, I can rapidly pull it away like so. So now leave the oil to drain for a good while. Now leave the pan there as well, because we've still got to do the oil filter yet, and oil will drain back into this sump while we're doing the oil filter above. While on the subject of oil, we must remember we should never put used oil or any oil down the household drains, and it must be put back into a suitable container and taken to the local recycling centre where they can dispose of it correctly. So we can now add a tray below the oil filter in case of spillage. If we do this correctly, very little oil should be on that tray. Here's a photo of where the oil filter is located, and as you can see it's barely visible. I have highlighted it in red. So there's the oil filter in red, and we need to remove that air intake hose in yellow so that we can get better access to this. To get to the black plastic oil filter housing, we need to unclip the air intake pipe. This should be fairly simple to do. So we need to use our little fingers here and just to squeeze that pipe back off. There's some clips along the edges which you need to just push in. You do have to pull quite hard and hopefully not break it. There's one on the other side of that, but there we go, out it comes, and we can now get to the oil filter. Just showing you the clips there. Use a 27mm socket to undo the black filter housing. You might find a flexible adapter can help in this tight situation here with the oil filter. So using your 27mm socket, we're now going to undo this. We're not going to remove it all the way, we're just going to undo it probably about 3/4 of the way. Now the idea of that is as we undo this, there's a little spigot on the filter and that will lift off like a drain hole. So as this comes away, we should hear the oil start dripping back into the sump. There we are, like so. So now we need to just leave it to drain a little bit longer, and then we can remove the filter completely. What I'll do now is get myself a little tray ready to catch this oil filter into, because obviously it will drip oil as we remove it, but hopefully not a lot. We can now remove the filter completely. So here we go. We can remove the socket now. You can still hear the oil dripping. So it is quite fiddly, but here it comes. So there's the filter in the housing, and you can see the little spigot on the end there. By allowing the filter housing to drain, there should be very little oil, if any, on that tray. So let's take a look. There we are. Only one drop on the tray. We can now take a closer look at the oil filter. We can remove the old rubber seal and dirty filter cartridge, replacing the old O-ring with the new O-ring, making sure it's seated correctly. Here's a photo showing the old filter with the spigot, and here's a photo showing where that spigot sits on the body of the filter housing. So we need to remove the actual cartridge from the black housing, which is a real struggle, but there we go. Those are always really tight to pull out. So then we've got the old rubber seal here, so you need some sort of pick or something, and just pick the old seal off. There we are. And then give that a clean with some paper towel, like so. And give the groove where the new rubber seal is going to go, give that a little clean as well. Now we do need some oil. So there's our new filter and there's our new seal. I'll just get some oil. So put a few squirts on the new O-ring. That will help seal it and also help it go back in when we put it back on the engine. So be careful here, don't stretch it too much, just enough to actually get it onto the black housing, and make sure you get it into the right groove. I'm going to give it a little bit more oil as well, just to make sure it doesn't catch or anything as we screw that back in. Now we don't put the filter element in at this point, that goes onto the engine first. But what I will do is put a few drops of oil on that spigot, because there's another little rubber seal on there. So I'm going to make sure that's lubricated. The paper element is inserted into the oil filter base on the engine first, as we have to ensure that the spigot is located correctly. Then the black cover is screwed back on. So taking our new filter cartridge element and our newly oiled spigot, we then need to note where that hole is on the base part, which is on the engine, and make sure we get that spigot inserted into that little hole. So once it's in place, it should look like this. Now replace the black oil filter cover and torque this to 25 Newton meters. So we can now take our black cover and push that over the top of the filter cartridge. You do need to push down on this because there is a bit of resistance to the internal plastic clip that holds this filter cover on. So you do need to push, but make sure you don't cross thread it or anything. Once it's in place, we then use our torque wrench to 25 Newton meters. So spin that on until we get our click. There we go. So we can now put the air pipe back on. So make sure that's lined up correctly. You do need quite flexible fingers here. Give that a good push. It's not that easy to get on. And that one's a bit easier. And there we are, that's that done. Now to replace the sump plug, and you should also replace the copper sealing washer, as this crushes to seal when tightened. The sump plug is tightened to 34 Newton meters. So ideally you would use a new copper washer here, because they do crush to seal. So I mean, sometimes you can get away with it, but technically it should be replaced. And then using a 21mm socket, on a torque wrench. So 34 Newton meters. Like I said, use a 21mm socket there and just pop that back in until we get our click. So that's that done. We can now remove the oil catch pan carefully and pour the oil into an empty container for taking down to the local recycling centre. So being very careful not to spill any, gently pull the pan out and use an old container and pour the oil into that and take it to the recycling. We can now remove the axle stands and lower the car back down. So I might need to just jack the car up slightly here so you can get those axle stands out, and then I lower the car back down the same way I jacked it up, bit by bit each side. There we are. Now to refill with clean oil. As previously mentioned, I'm going to use a Ford specification oil which is fully synthetic. So to make life easier, I know that I need 3.8 litres of oil to refill this. So if I do a quick bit of maths here, I've got 5 litres in the container. I'll take away that 3.8. That tells me how much should be left in the container once I've put the right amount in, which is 1.2 litres left. Mark that, and then I can pour all of it in to that line. So using a funnel, always wise to use a funnel, we can now pour our fresh oil in. Now if you hold the container sideways on its side, it won't glug 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 like it will if you hold it vertically, because air can get back into the container as you're pouring it easier. So it tends to be a safer way of pouring. Now what I'm doing is just checking there till the oil gets to that low 1.2 litre line, which is about there now. So that should be my 3.8 litres in the engine. So we can now just pop the cap back on and start the engine. Now start the engine and run for a short while to ensure the oil pressure warning light goes out. The new oil filter should now be refilled with fresh oil. Turn the engine back off and leave for a few minutes to allow the oil to settle back into the sump so we can take an accurate oil level reading on the dipstick. To check the oil, we remove the dipstick, give it a wipe and reinsert, and then take our reading. So here's a photo of the dipstick to show where minimum and maximum is. So withdraw your dipstick, give it a good wipe over, make sure it's nice and clean. Now we pop it back in, and that should give us an accurate reading now. So it does need a little bit of a top up, and here's a closer look at the dipstick. And lastly, make a note of the mileage for the service record. In my case, this is 107,156 miles. Since this car is new to me, and with these filters it's easy to inspect the old filter media for signs of metal particles. Certainly not essential, but can be worth a quick look as it might highlight some potential engine wear. So using a pair of sheet metal tin snips, I'm just going to cut all the pleats at the bottom, and then I can pull this plastic part off like so, and then do the same again to the other end, and then remove that part, remove the plastic core in the middle, and then I can stretch the media open and just inspect it and see if there's any glistening of metal particles, like bronze and metals such as that, because that will give you an indication of if there's anything untoward happening in the engine. Here are some detailed photographs with labels to help with identifying all the visible parts. I will put them on for only 4 seconds each, with the idea that you can pause them for detailed viewing. Thank you for watching, and hope this helped other home mechanics out.